further you get away from official Washington, the closer you get to reality.
That's one of the hazards in this business, is when you rely on top-level sources too much, you can lose out on getting the real information.
The president's top national security advisors fanned out on the talk shows with a coordinated message.
The test here is not whether they can find something. The test is whether or not Iraq is going to cooperate.
This is about the disarmament of Iraq, not about weapons inspectors hunting and pecking all over the country.
Time is running out, and we just can't keep hunting and pecking and looking.
The people at the top generally are political rather than professional. And their first loyalty is to a political party or to a person, not to a bureaucracy, not to a job. And so what you get from them is spin.
Look, I'm a blue-collar guy from Buffalo. I know who my sources are. I work them very hard. It's the mid-level people that tell you the truth.
They're the ones who know the story?
Well, they're working on the problem, and they understand the detail much better than a lot of the so-called policymakers and political officials.
But they don't get on the Sunday talk show.
No, you can't. I mean, they don't want to be, trust me. I mean, they can lose their jobs, and they know it. But they can provide information which can help in me challenging or trying to draw out sometimes their bosses and other public officials.
What do you make of the fact that of the 414 Iraq stories broadcast on NBC, ABC, and CBS nightly news from September 2002 until February 2003, almost all the stories could be traced back to sources from the White House, the Pentagon, and the State Department?
It's important that you have an opposition party. That's our system of government.
So it's not news unless there's somebody...
No, I didn't say that. But it's important to have an opposition party, your opposing views.
More and more in the media become, I think, common carriers of administration statements and critics of administration. And we've sort of given up being independent on our own.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States.
We used to do at the Post something called truth squatting. The president would make a speech. We used to do it with Ronald Reagan the first 5 or 6 months because he would make so many factual errors, particularly his press conference.
From $10,000 to $60,000 a year.
And after 2 or 3 weeks of it, the public at large would say, why don't you leave the man alone? He's trying to be honest. He makes mistakes. So what? And we stopped doing it.
You stopped being a truth squad.
We stopped truth squatting every sort of press conference or truth squatting. And we left it then to the Democrats. In other words, it's up to the Democrats to catch people, not us.
So if the Democrats challenged a statement from the president, you could quote both sides?
We then quote both sides.
You know, that's called objectivity by many standards, isn't it?
Well, that's objectivity if you think there are only two sides, and if you're not interested in the facts. And the facts are separate from, what one side says about the other.
By late November 2002, the press had yet another chance to get the facts right. Facing intense international pressure, the White House agreed to hold off military action until Saddam Hussein permitted a team of UN inspectors to return to Iraq and take a closer look. The first inspections began on November 27th. Charles Hanley, a prize-winning reporter for the Associated Press, with more than 30 years' experience reporting on weapons issues, went along to cover their work.
What we did was go out every day with the inspectors. These guys would roar out on these motorcades at very high speed and roar through towns and do sudden U-turns and drive overland and do all of these things to confuse the Iraqis about where they were going, so that there wouldn't be a call ahead telling them to put away all the bad stuff. The inspectors then would issue a daily report, and as it turned out, of course, inspection after inspection turned out to be clean. They had nothing to report, no violations to report.
In January of 2003, Hanley wrote about the suspicious sites that the U.S. and British governments had earlier identified as major concerns. No smoking guns and almost 400 inspections, he reported. It ought to have cast serious doubt on the White House's entire evaluation of the Iraqi threat. But reporting like this was overshadowed by the drumbeat from Washington which is why, Henley says, sometimes his editors balked when he wrote that the White House lacked firm evidence on weapons of mass destruction.
And that would be stricken from my copy because it would strike some editors as tendentious, as sort of an attack or some sort of allegation rather than a fact. And we don't want our reporters alleging things. You just report the facts. Well, it was a fact. It was a very important fact that seemed to be lost on an awful lot of journalists, unfortunately.
6 weeks before the invasion, with the facts still in short supply, the American Secretary of State went before the United Nations.
I cannot tell you everything that we know, but what I can share with you, when combined with what all of us have learned over the years, is deeply troubling.
One major problem was that Secretary Powell barely acknowledged that there were inspections going on. It got to ridiculous points such as his complaining about the fact that they'd put a roof over this open-air shed where they were testing missiles.
This photograph was taken in April of 2002. Since then, the test stand has been finished and a roof has been put over it, so it'll be harder for satellites to see what's going on underneath the test stand.
What he neglected to mention was that the inspectors were underneath watching what was going on.
A single drop of VX on the skin will kill in minutes 4 tons.
He didn't point out that most of that had already been destroyed. And on point after point, he failed to point out that these facilities about which he was raising such alarm were under repeated inspections by good expert people with very good equipment, and who were leaving behind cameras and other monitoring equipment to keep a continuing eye on it.
Leaving Saddam Hussein in possession of weapons of mass destruction for a few more months or years is not an option, not in a post-September 11th world.
The holes in his presentation became immediate within days, if not hours.
But what I want to bring to your attention today is the potentially much more sinister nexus between Iraq and the Al-Qaeda terrorist network, a nexus that combines classic terrorist organizations and modern methods of murder.
One of the first big embarrassments was Powell had talked about this British intelligence report.
I would call my colleagues' attention to the fine paper that the United Kingdom distributed yesterday, which describes in exquisite detail Iraqi deception activities.
Supposedly, that exquisite detail from British intelligence came from a top-secret dossier.
Literally within a day or two, it was proven in the British press that had simply been downloaded off the internet and was plagiarized, and it can actually contain the typos that were in the original.
The British government dossier is supposed to be about Iraqi deception and concealment. It says it draws upon a number of sources, including intelligence material. Well, actually, what it largely draws on is a thesis written by a Californian postgraduate student.
That was just the first of many embarrassments that were to come. But within days, the British press was going crazy over this revelation.
As for the student himself, he's accused the government of plagiarism.
If the government is reduced to trawling academic journals, then how good is the rest of its case for war against Iraq?
Few prominent American broadcasters would ask such pointed questions.
The Secretary of State Colin Powell has made the case against Iraq.
Secretary of State Colin Powell has given a lot of important speeches in his lifetime to a lot of large audiences, but no speech was more important than the one he gave today.
In the United Nations Security Council this morning, the Secretary of State Colin Powell took almost an hour and a half to make the Bush administration's case against Saddam Hussein.
Making the case for war, Secretary Powell shows the world what he calls undeniable proof.
Colin Powell was trusted, is trusted, I put it in a sense. He, unlike many of the people who made the decision to go to war, Colin Powell has seen war. He knows what a green jungle hell Vietnam was. He knows what the battlefield looks like. And when Colin Powell says to you, I, Colin Powell, am putting my personal stamp on this information. It's my name, my face, and I'm putting it out there. That did make a difference.
And you were impressed.
I was impressed. And who wouldn't be?
And you look at the response from, forget about the right-wing media,
from the so-called liberal press the next morning. You pick up the Washington Post, on the op-ed page, there's Jim Hoagland saying, obviously, from what Powell said, there are weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. You go a few inches away to Richard Cohen, a avowed liberal. He says, obviously, there are weapons of mass destruction. I mean, it's a fair paraphrase to say these pundits and many others were asserting, if you don't think there are WMDs in Iraq, you are an idiot.